I think what Ian was talking about, if you're getting involved in succession planning, there's a couple of things you must do, and one is, of course, is communicate with all involved, and above and beyond that you have to listen, because if you don't listen, you're certainly not communicating. Can we have the panel up, please? I hope you're getting your questions ready. I'll introduce them all individually in a moment, if you can come up to the stage. My own, while they're coming up, I'll just relate one of my own observations of a family succession that wasn't, and turned out very nasty. A family I was familiar with in Western Queensland. Dad died suddenly and there was no family succession planning. So the brothers and the sisters fought with each other about what was going on, and for 10 years they didn't speak to each other except through lawyers, which cost a lot of money. Eventually they resolved the situation, but it was a classic example of family succession that wasn't, and it cost a lot of money, a lot of pain, a lot of heartache. And of course there are in-laws involved as well. One of them was probably an outlaw, but it certainly took a lot of angst out of that family, and they're just barely over it now. Now let me introduce the panel. We have Ian on our far right, of course. Next to Ian we have Carly Burnham. Carly is a Power's client and a beef producer. Carly and her husband Grant run a beef breeding and fattening business near Mara with nearly 2,000 head of cattle. Carly and Grant have 4 children ranging from ages 5 to 11. And Carly and Grant went through the succession planning process several years ago with the transition of the operating business over to their control. So you might be a good one to ask questions about transitioning. David Hutchinson. David's here. David is a cotton, grain and beef producer on properties located between Mara and Theodore. David is married to Verley and they have 5 adult children. Up until 2012, David and Verley's business was run as a joint family operation with his parents, brothers and their respective families. Following a family business restructure, David and Verley now operate their own business with the help of their 3 children. Geoff Arnold. Geoff is a Billawheeler-based director of Powers Accountants and Advisors, who has over 20 years of experience at Powers dealing with the specific needs of small business owners, investors and primary producers. Georgie Somerset. Of course, Georgie's one of the best-known faces and names in agribusiness in Queensland. She's been on more boards than Fred Astaire, and I'm just reading. She's currently a director of QRAA still, and that's one of her significant positions, but there are a lot of others. Welcome, Georgie. We have Roger Nobbs. Who's Roger? Roger's behind me here. Look at him. It's a well-known name in central Queensland as well. Roger and his wife Rosalind have 6 children ranging from their teens to late 20s. They have a number of properties which they operate themselves. Roger also jointly owns several grazing properties near Springsure with his parents, brothers and their respective families, which are operated by the family company. And from Westpac. Where is it? Oh, yeah, I think I've lost your CV. Peta Ward, Regional General Manager of Westpac in Queensland. Peter, as you noticed, she thinks she's in Malta because she's riding a horse without a helmet, and had a low side fall the other day, and she's broken a leg and a toe. Peter, since 2010, she has been responsible for the commercial and agribusiness segment across various regions in Victoria. In 2014, Peter was appointed to the role in Queensland. After spending 11 years in Victoria, she has been in banking since 2002 with a variety of roles in both Queensland and Victoria. Peter actually grew up on a beef property at Yulbar in Queensland. Peter is married to Scott with 1 son, William. Have I missed anybody? We're all here. Any questions? Think about your questions. We've got the roving mic up there with Rebecca. Anyone like to ask a question? I can start if you like. I'd like to ask Roger. Stand up here, mate. You've got a lot of family in your history. When you were doing all this family succession planning, how did it affect the family relationships? Come up here.
Yeah.
That's it, I think, yeah.
We were probably pretty lucky, being 3 brothers worked together and plus 2 other sisters. We've worked together for a long time, and that's probably the best thing for our business, that we could work together, and we went about our own things at times, but we still all work together. So that's probably the only thing, Kerry.
Were there any difficulties at all, or were they easily resolved?
No, we've had a pretty, really between the three of us, three boys, it's been easy.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. Carly, you've done the restructuring as well, haven't you? How did it affect your inter-family relationships?
Well, it was challenging at times, and my role in the family is daughter-in-law. So I was sort of looking, from a helicopter view at times and then right in amongst it at other times. And I think for us the key was a mutual respect, a respect for the older generation, the younger generation, and siblings also. And understanding, I think Ian's point in his presentation about purpose, a shared purpose. What is it that all the individuals in the family are working towards? And does that connect up to what we want for our business? And understanding our role in our business and our role in our family, and how at that intersection it's very challenging. So I think illuminating and having those tough conversations and being patient, it takes a lot of time. And I think, any time is a good conversation for like we have with our children. What do you want to be when you grow up? If we continue those conversations, what are you doing now you're growing up? Is this what you want to do? And I feel really blessed that we had it was very challenging at times, and now we have a beautiful relationship as a family and have a very successful and growthful business. So and I recommend getting your team on side, accounting, finance, banking, to work on all that technical stuff, because there's a lot to take in. And our role is to work on the family dynamic, and there's people out there to help with that also.
Thank you, Carly. Any questions from the floor here?
Mark Gubbins, Kerry from Western Victoria. What I'd like to, if we could have a discussion on, we all know that it's hard to find cash in agriculture to pay city-based equivalent salaries, and if anyone could sort of enlighten on anything they've done with regard to salary sacrifice to family farming children, with regard to greater ownership than somebody that's gone off the farm and earned a decent salary elsewhere.
Peta, one for you.
Thanks, Mark. We see all sorts of different cases, particularly in the role that I'm in. So you see, people go, leave the farm, go and, mum and dad say, well, you finish school, now go and get an education, and then, you decide to go and, like myself, go and do banking or something else. And then, it's about, well, how do you then transition back to that farm if you want to eventually come back? And, it's a bit like Carly said, it's one of those situations where everybody needs to sit down and have the conversation about, well, now that you've gone and done this, do you still want to come back to the farm? And then how do we start working through that so that mum and dad are able to retire, but also there's a viable business, because the children have gone off and earned a significant income potentially off farm, and that going back to the farm may not provide that income, and it's working through those different scenarios with your trusted advisors.
Georgie?
I think the other thing is that often we talk about the low salaries in agriculture, but one of the things we need to do is consider the package. And so I like to consider the whole package that we're including. So there's a house package, there's often a car included, there's often electricity, telecommunications, fuel, sometimes rations. And so we need to also package the salary. So it may not be as significant direct income into a bank account, but when you package what it would be costing to rent a house, run a car, have fuel, pay the energy and those sorts of things, it's sometimes not as inequitable as you might have thought. So I think it's important in families to think about the whole package that someone is getting as well.
Any more questions? I've got a question.
Ian, just before I give it to you, Ian, it's important to start the communication going very early, because I've seen situations where one son has actually left the property, believing that they were doing the right thing because the property couldn't sustain that person and their family, only to believe that they would be able to come back on at some point in the time. Son 2 that has stayed on feels very aggrieved and believes that son 1, as almost a brother, has abandoned the situation. So as along with communication, the big key is don't assume anything when it comes to succession planning. It has to be upfront, on the table, and these need to be issues worked through. The other thing, as an accountant, we become very friendly. We develop strong relationships with clients, and they become friends. You come in and you will get into a discussion about what does retirement look like and how things are progressing, and you will get somebody saying to you, "Oh, don't go there, Geoff, that's just going to open a can of worms." And I did have one spouse say to the husband at one stage, "When we walk out of here, those worms are still going to be there, Bruce. Geoff hasn't created the worms, he just wants to try to help you get rid of them." So it's a case of, you need to be upfront and honest and really get those hard discussions out there.
So I'll just go back to the question, and Georgie's point also. One is, I agree with what Georgie said, is often the actual package that the on-farm child's getting often isn't as low as it often appears at first face value because of the fringe benefits. And if you really want to compare, you've actually got to work them backwards too on a pre-tax equivalent. Because if you gross up for tax the fringe benefits of, possibly often it can be food, fuel that's just slipping through the farm account, and phone usage and these other things, you gross them up for tax, and it can actually be starting not looking too bad. But at the same time, usually there is a big gap, still a gap between the wages, and it is totally valid to do the calculation of foregone wages in working out what the overall succession plan is going to be. And we do that all the time with clients in the workshops when we're trying to work out what the split of assets is going to be. And the foregone wages, if you talk in 10 or 20 years, can multiply out to quite a large amount. And and the Centrelink, the government recognise this, that it's a valid a deduction you take off your assets for the pension assets test. If there's been a transfer of the farming property over to the next generation, when you work out they're eligible for the pension assets test, you exclude an amount equal to the foregone wages debt.
I want to ask David a question because David's on his CV's got 5 adult children. David, would you like to stand up here? David, what was your journey like through the succession planning and how meaningful was the outcome?
Well, I guess we step back further to when we first started as a family operation, was probably when I left high school. And we had a family partnership running for 40 years before we decided we'd try and get a partnership agreement together. So it shows you how well we worked together, but I guess the principle was that we each had our own farm where we could operate, but the whole assets were all jointly owned and shared, and so we managed that way. But it's the next generation that started to become 20-year-old, 25-year-old that wanted to come involved in the farm. That's when we had to make a decision of where our future is going to be. Where are we going to get bigger as a conglomerate, or where are we going to go in individual ways? And each family member had their own ideas where they wanted to go, and we had to sort of let go what my idea was and let him to follow his idea, because we couldn't all stay as a big family operation. Biggest thing we found to start with when we started to go down that track is that getting succession planners to talk about the succession planning. There's some good ones out there and there's some terrible ones. So getting an understanding, who should we get our family involved with as a succession planner, is one of the biggest issues I've found as a family operation. So I guess we did go through a number of succession planners, because some of them we just weren't going to melt together. Some of them are just basically, and they were some of the top ones around this country as being succession planners and basically run symposiums like this. So you just don't always say, just because they stand up here and give you a good spiel, that they are a good succession planner, because some of them, I tell you, they're not very good. They might work for some families, but for our family it didn't work.
I'm sure these are okay. These are powers are fantastic.
I won't. Basically, powers were able to help us with the accounting side of things. And mind you, my family, for myself and my son, who is also basically a university-trained accountant, he didn't go down and do the CPA or everything, but he's got a great understanding of that. And I guess that was probably one of the disadvantages from the rest of my brothers in being able to involve, because one was a very high up in the financial side of things, while the others didn't do so much the management. And they had to find their own way after we split up. But I guess having the accountants is one thing. You need to have good accountants, and certainly we've been powers since they basically come to Billawilla. So we know how they've grown and changed over. But getting a good accountants, probably the next one is getting a good legal entity involved. And some of them, I can tell you, are hopeless.
Lawyer
They
being
don't
hopeless.
understand what some of the issues are involved. And I could go on a few more of those, but yeah, just be careful. You've had a legal entity who's been with your family for X number of years. Doesn't mean they know how to handle succession planning to be able to get to ins and outs of the legal side of things. So,
But the journey, was it all worthwhile?
it was worthwhile, because I guess after we split our family, my brother's family partnership, now I'm going into the move of doing another succession plan with my children. And I guess it's a bit more involvement because we've got some on farm and some off farm. And for various reasons, the ones that go off farm first is because, well, Mum are not going to be able to get us through university. I'll go and get off farm and go through university in a different way.
Yeah.
So that was one of our family members. But I guess generally, now we're split up, we've actually all individual family as my brothers. We've grown further because we've been willing to take higher risk in our own family operation and argue with the conglomerate
Good
family.
point, good point. Thank you, David.
Kerry, we've got a question from
Yes.
the crowd.
Yep.
Thank you. Roddy Brown, Regional General Manager for Victoria and Tasmania with the Westpac Agribusiness. What we're seeing increasingly popular, particularly down in Victoria and the dairying side of things, is the evolution of equity partnerships as a way of, I suppose, parents now able to realise capital and place it elsewhere out of the farming operation, but also as an entry point for sons. It doesn't necessarily have to be within families, but for the younger people to get in early. Just interested in your thoughts around that, around those type of models, and if you're seeing much of that occurring up here.
My understanding of what the model you're talking about is when the parents aren't transferring the land, but they're using the equity to fund in that land to fund the next generation into the operation side of the business. Is that right?
But particularly when we see companies becoming or being formed, and it's a matter about, I suppose, purchase or transfer units. So the person coming with the operation runs the farm as an equity manager, whereby they slowly acquire greater ownership over time. So they effectively purchase equity out of their earnings or out of profits. And then there's also, by releasing the units as the parents or the majority owners, they can slowly step away from the operation and basically take a larger slice from the farm capital gain as they progress or move along over the years.
Yeah, certainly a number of people are doing that, and depends on the size of the business of the family. Each family is different, and that's one of the solutions that we see them using. But still, at this stage, it's more common. It'll be done in a faster way than gradual little tiny chunks at a time. Do you want to add to it?
Yeah, I'm thinking about more creative ways of doing succession, and that's what I'm linking to with your comment. And in our situation, for about 10 years, there was a percentage of sales of cattle that went into a fund. The cash wasn't the cash was never realised, but it was like an equity building up. So that actually was, the business, Grant's parents making a decision, being proactive early on, and it was a way the business could enable in 10 years' time. That equity was recognised and that contributed to the succession. And I think there's opportunity, and there's been seminars and speakers at Beef talking about ways of collaborating and working creatively and differently. And I think it comes down to the purpose, and do we want to continue a family operation? There's so much emotion attached to ownership of land, for over a century or half a century. So, and I agree, there's definitely opportunity to expand our thinking.
Georgie, Somerset. George, would you get something? George is, she's so busy. We're so grateful to have you here today, Georgie. You see everything from a broader perspective. How does this issue manifest itself? Is it spoken of, or is it...
I think succession planning is something that I've been hearing people talk about for 25 years. So pretty much my time in as an operator in agriculture. But I think the other thing is that I don't think it's ever finished. So 18 years ago we started seriously doing our succession planning with my parents-in-law, and I was one of those daughter-in-laws. The boys are now 20 and 19, and the 20-year-old is now involved in the business, but so are the 86 and 85-year-old parents-in-law. So I'm fast looking at becoming the mother-in-law. It's not in the offing, but I don't think it ever finishes. So I think it actually is a frame of reference that people are talking about all the time, because we ebb and flow through different stages of succession, and I think it's a constant in agriculture.
So you're saying make sure you update your succession plan?
Yeah, I just don't think it finishes. You go through phases, so we've been busy educating, but at the same time we've been working with my parents-in-law around, in fact, things like living wills. So, some of the things that Ian was talking about was maybe you make this happen before you die so that you actually know what's going to happen and there's some security for everybody involved. And I think that it is a constant process.
Okay, thank you, Georgie.
Can I just put in a plug though too, that we have a couple of the QRAA guys here today, Brendan and Peta. So QRAA have the productivity loans and also the First Start loans. And I think they're a key part of succession planning, is that if you want to lift productivity, sometimes access to funding, and I'm not going into competition with Peter in any way, we work with all the banks, but the current interest rate is 3.88%, so it's significant. And if you're a new entrant, there are ways where we can help you stage that. You might buy a mob of cattle, or you might buy part of the property, so you might do some of that transfer, and you might stage it. And so I see QRAA as being a real partner in some of the succession planning and productivity enhancement conversations as well.
So get on the website and look it up. Rebecca, please.
My question is to the panel. I'm Noel Hill from Mitchell. I've seen certain circumstances where, and it was suggested today, that control of operating assets to start with, and then possibly even the land, can be handed over through these different mechanisms. But for the off-farm siblings, they are basically asked to wait until the end. And I was just wondering what the panel thought about reconciling that inequity.
I think that's a growing issue. One sibling moving off the farm, while the other one stays. Anyone want to have a go at that? Yeah.
Hi Noel, that's a great question. And in our situation, we had Bruce and Barb, Mum and Dad, and Grant at home for 15 years, and I joined the family, and then we worked in that way for about 7 or 8 years, and the off-farm siblings had an opportunity, and Grant's parents wanted to provide them the opportunity to come home to the property. So that was a trying time, and that was succession in action. So there was a whole lot of rearranging, and how can this happen? And so we had to actually look at what can this business do. Went through the strategies, and it helped us to better understand, we're running a business and we're now supporting 3 families, and this is how it looks. So that actually enacted the long-term process. So, you know, from our experience, I'm grateful for that opportunity because it helped us sort out the future. And I think that having those conversations with professionals or as a family, we can't make assumptions about what the children or farm, how connected they are and what involvement they have. And I think that's a key part of the picture.
Thank you, Carly. We could talk about this for days, I'm sure. But we have to move on. And would you please kindly thank the panel in the usual way?